Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Very excited to have you all join. I can't believe that it's actually already June. School is wrapping up for a lot of students. You may not be in class, but classes themselves are wrapping up, which is great. For the juniors out there, it is time to get started. So if you haven't really started, this is the month. You can make some progress on your college applications, and I'm strongly encouraging that. For today's show, we're going to do a listener Q&A, and we're going to focus on actually your admissions questions because we have a lot of those building up, and so we're going to try and see if we can tackle more of those in our Q&A segments today. But before we get to all of that, one of the things that I think we hear a lot about here at College Coach and in general is just, is my student even going to get into college? They're not straight A, they're not a straight A student. And so what we wanted to focus on today is college for the BC student. There are lots of students out there getting Bs, getting some Cs. College is for those students. This is not, that doesn't mean you can't go to college. And so very excited to welcome my colleague, Tova Tolman, to the show. What I particularly love about Tova joining me for this segment is that she has worked at 3 very different institutions. She worked at Barnard, which is highly selective. She worked at Fordham, which is selective, and at Montclair State, which is not necessarily wouldn't be considered selective. So welcome to the show, Tova.
Thanks, Beth. Happy to be here today.
Great. So as we mentioned, those are 3 very different institutions. Yep. And I would bet that even at the selective institution, Fordham, you saw plenty of students with Bs on their transcript and even the occasional C, and it didn't automatically disqualify them from, getting accepted. So I guess maybe just your general thoughts about BC students and college admissions.
Sure. I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning with just the very fact that is the average main college goer. If you have Bs and Cs, you too are probably college ready. That the majority of students in our country who are going to college are not straight A students, that maybe they have an occasional A, right. But that if you look at your own high school, and this is what I would often laugh about with students. They think, oh gosh, I'm really more of a B student. Surely I can't go to college. And I would ask them, do most students in your high school not go to college? Is that really the case? Oh no, we have an average of 85%, 90% go on to a 4-year school. Well, do 90% of the students in your school have straight A's? Oh, no, I guess not. So right. Recognizing that it can look like a lot of different things and that you're going to have plenty of options is probably the first place to begin. Right.
And one thing that you mentioned when we were preparing for this segment was where you find that out. I'm sometimes amazed at the students that I work with who really, they don't know how many students are in their senior class. They don't really have any idea because a lot of schools these days don't rank. So they don't know a ranking, and therefore they kind of have no perspective on what other students are getting beyond what they might be hearing from their friends. So what's a resource you can go to that your school will provide that can give you that perspective?
Great question. The school profile is a document that's usually sent from every high school to the colleges alongside the transcript. It is my friend because anytime I had to learn a new high school, understand what was offered at that school, what does an A look like at the school, how freely are they given out, what is sort of an average program in terms of rigor. That's what the document I would look at. You can usually find it right forward facing on the guidance page or the college counseling page. If you just go to your high school's website, type into the search bar school profile, usually you can find it as the first hit if you don't already even see it on the front page of the counseling section of the website.
Right. And generally schools are updating this every year because GPA trends change from year to year, right? So you might have one class that comes through with a lot of students getting really great grades, and then you might have another class comes through and it's fewer. So your position is going to also be relative to your peers at your school. Right. So as a BC student, you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, well, I went on Big Future, which is a resource that we often recommend that families check out. And it provides a lot of information about different colleges. And maybe you're looking at a school and they're saying that their average GPA is a 3.48. And you're thinking, okay, well, my GPA is more like a 2.9.
Nine.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you understand, where what that school is really admitting maybe,
Yeah.
or how those numbers might be not as accurate as you would imagine?
They're not as accurate. They're probably based on something. They're not lying and making things up, but are they telling the full story?
Right.
Are they including a weighted GPA? Is that number that the school is advertising as the average for an admitted student reflecting PE and choir and health? And are those numbers inflating what that average GPA is? And maybe you're comparing it to your unweighted, no extra points for the rigor of your courses, just your core academic courses, just that math, the science, foreign language, social studies, and English. So step one is finding out from the college, and it probably means asking the college directly themselves, what is that GPA that you've reported? What is that reflecting? Is that just core courses? Is that just, is that an unweighted or a weighted average? Basically, how many extra points are being shown for weight and rigor for honors courses and AP courses? Because those are harder courses. And if you have a B average, straight B's, maybe straight 2.9 is still kind of a B. It's a low B, it's still above a B minus. And you, let's say, have all honors and AP courses, that's a lot different than a student who's taken straight basket weaving and maybe barely college prep courses and a whole lot of holes in their curriculum who has straight B's. And keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to note. And one of the things that I have seen since I started doing this work, when I worked at Penn, one of our goals when you address the audience was to try and capture every person in the audience, because it could be that most of the students in the audience, sort of had certain expectations of what Penn was going to be about, but just because you didn't have a 4.0 did not necessarily make you a bad candidate for us. And we sort of almost took pains to downplay a little, just because you didn't want to kind of, I'm like, not scare anyone, but a little bit, right? And
Sure.
You didn't want that one person who would be great for you, but who might be like, well, I only have, a 3.5, to automatically discount Penn. I think that's kind of the best way to think about it. But I think the reverse happens. So sometimes you go to schools. I remember a mom visiting, not to pick on University of Central Florida, but mom visited University of Central Florida with her daughter, who was a B student. And she came back and she said, well, gosh, in that info session, they were saying that the average student they admit has an A average. And I just basically said, I could tell you for a fact that is definitely not true. And I think what they were trying to do, they were using that kind of inflated calculation that was not real, but probably based on maybe they calculated their own GPA or did something like that. And what they were doing was trying to make themselves feel more attractive to the people in the room, because they didn't want people to say, well, if the average person gets in with a B average, then maybe we want something that we feel is more reflective of brighter students or whatever it is. So everyone's kind of playing that game a little bit, with some people kind of inflating and others trying to deflate a little bit. So you have to watch out for that a little. So where are other places that you would suggest students start who are BC students? Certainly there are lots of colleges where they do have expectations that you're going to be doing really well. So how do you get to the schools where they are going to welcome you with open arms and be perfectly happy with what you've been doing?
Sure. And there is some reality to that, as you said. I want to encourage every student, but we do a lot of talking on the show and at College Coach in general about the highly selective world. And I think it's fair to be honest and say, listen, if you really are mostly a B, some C's, no matter how rigorous of your course load, those 30, 40, 50 some schools we're often talking about probably are going to be out of reach from a just purely metrics, numeric perspective. So then, okay, how do you find those other schools? The step one is looking outside those same 30, 40 schools you hear people talking about all the time, and recognizing there are 4,000 schools out there. So, okay, maybe it's fine to not be super focused on these same 40 schools everyone else is talking about. There are some great lists out there. One of my favorites is the Colleges That Change Lives. It
Yes.
focuses on a lot of smaller schools, though, but they change lives. Incredibly impactful, amazing outcomes. But if you're not as interested in maybe some of the small liberal arts colleges, the A+ colleges for B students is another great place to look, as it sounds. Great schools for B students.
Right.
And I think some families might be surprised by some name recognition out there. In general, these days, if you're talking about a big state public flagship for your state, as in the go-to, most well, sort of, I don't say well known, maybe the flagship institution for your state might end up being out of reach if you're really more B's and C's than A's. You can absolutely have some B's, but if you really, let's be honest, are on the low end of that B, approaching B minus C plus range, the flagship institution might be out of reach. But chances are there are many other campuses in your state that you can look at outside the main branch that are going to be phenomenal, that might have opportunities for growth and reach to the main flagship as well, and other avenues too. And those are just some places to start, just to give you an idea of schools that you maybe haven't already heard of. But the main theme here is look outside the same schools that you're hearing again and again and again, and instead focus on, gosh, what do I really want? What's going to be a good fit for me? Let me get away from what I know already and think about some other schools out there.
Right, exactly. And I think your point's a good one about maybe the flagship is not going to be available to you. And I think, how do you judge that? Well, does your school have an education system that really appeals not only to the people in state, but also out of state?
Right.
So, the schools that come to mind immediately, Michigan, Wisconsin, Madison, all of the UCs, the schools in, maybe in North Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill, University of Virginia. These are schools that are pulling students from all over the country and, quite honestly, the world. Mm-hmm. But even, you'll see some schools that like you said, you'll find name recognition, and it could be your school's flagship, but University of South Carolina, I'm not sure that B's and C's are keeping you out. I don't know that B's and C's are keeping you out of Michigan State, maybe not Michigan, and they may not keep you out of NC State. So if you can move beyond just those, like you say, you just have to move beyond the schools that everybody seems to want because somehow someone decided that those were the best schools out there, right? That's really kind of what it comes down to. Yeah.
Which usually ends up working out for your benefit anyway, because it's somewhat arbitrary. Why is that a good school for you anyway? Is that the right match? So if, let's say it is, that was the dream, let's identify why, and now work on finding some other schools that are just like it, that share so many of the same attributes, that aren't going to have that same level of selectivity in their admission process.
Yes, absolutely. And so what about community college? So I would say the first thing I want to say here is that B's and C's, as hopefully you have taken away already, do not stop you from going right into a four-year institution. So that is not, we're not suggesting community college because we think you can't get in anywhere else.
No, right.
But community college is an option. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and this can be a great option for a student who really had their heart set on their state flagship. Let's say, let's pick on the UCs, for example, the University of California system. Let's say you have a student who just was dying to go to Berkeley for all the right reasons. They've really researched it well. They understand X, Y, and Z is why they would love to be at Berkeley. And they recognize, yeah, that's not going to happen with my 2.8, with my 2.5, with my 2.7. It's just not going to happen. But at a system like the California process, they are so encouraging of community college transfers. If you go, you spend your first 2 years, you do well, you finish with your associates, all of a sudden you're a very strong candidate at a place like UC Berkeley or UCLA, where coming straight out of high school, you might not have been. And like you said, this is not necessary. You absolutely can go straight to a four-year school, and that might be the better route for you. And that's certainly something we've talked about in the past in general about starting at a community college or not, but that can be a way to sort of make you a very attractive candidate at your state public institution. Not necessarily the case if you are looking just to do a semester or a year, but if you're completing that full 2-year track, finish the associates, strong grades, strong program, you could become a very attractive candidate at a 4-year school that you might not otherwise have been directly out of high school.
Right. And I think that's just great points, right? There are options for you if you want to do 4-year, and then there might also be options for those students who are kind of late bloomers to really make a mark at the community college level and then transfer. But I think important to know is particularly look for those places where they have articulation agreements, where their goal is for community college students to transfer into 4-year institutions, which is one of the missions in California. Other places it might be a little bit more difficult. So you just want to check that out. Right, anything else? Any other message for our BC students out there?
Just please, I beg of you, take away and remember, you are the average college goer. These students with the straight A's and 5 AP classes and perfect test scores are not. Those are the exceptions. Those are the star students. They are not the bread and butter of our college goers today. So please remember that. You're doing great. You're showing mastery. You are a strong student. If you're B is satisfactory, better, right? Isn't it good?
Yes.
C is satisfactory. B is
yes.
good.
B is good. C
be
is
proud of your
satisfactory.
B's.
Exactly. All right, Tova, thank you so much for joining today. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be answering your questions. So don't go away.